another one of his rambling diatribes of the news of the day. As of 1:14 in the morning, it is 4th of July. So, happy 4th of July for those who are still awake or those who are going to watch this later on, if you watch it at all. It's one of those days of reflection, remembering all our historic heroics as a country. For the 4th of July, people will remember that for the signing the Declaration of Independence. Deep dives of those of also the date is the same date that both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, both at the same time on the same day of the 4th of July, died. Also, historically speaking, the 4th of July was also the same day in 1863 that Ulysses S. Grant secured the surrender of Vicksburg, and at the same time, the same day, Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia was retreating from Gettysburg. So there's a lot of significance towards the 4th of July. And today is one day shy of last night, time-wise, of Donald Trump doing his little rally at Mount Rushmore. There is so much to go into with that. One being that he flat out didn't bother to gain permission with the local Sioux Nation that actually owns the land. He didn't have permission to go there, but I don't even think that was a blip in his radar. I don't think he cares. And so there was a lot of protests that was happening from the locals, and the protest was such that they blocked highways. It was a standoff for about 2 or so hours. There was some arrests, but the protest was pushed far enough back that it would not even be noticed by anyone who was actually at the event. This particular event, I might add, the governor himself said that we're not going to worry about, social distancing. If anyone wears masks, what do they want to? Fine, but you don't have to. So, a nice center stage for Trump, right? And on this monumentous occasion, where Trump appears on Mount Rushmore in front of his adoring fan base that makes him feel so much better about himself, he goes on his usual divisive rants. The evil people that want to take down our Confederate statues, want to erase our history. Trump, you're a New Yorker. What does Confederate statues have to do with your history? But I digress, because you're seeking votes. But we'll go into such detail on this, as reported by the AP. Trump pushes racial division, flouts virus rules at Rushmore. At the foot of Mount Rushmore on the eve of Independence Day, President Donald Trump made a direct appeal to disaffected white voters 4 months before Election Day, accusing protesters who have pushed for racial justice of engaging in a merciless campaign to wipe out our history. The president dug further into American divisions on Friday, offering a discordant tone to an electorate battering by a pandemic and wounded by racial injustice following the high-profile killings of black people. He zeroed in on the desecration by some protesters of monuments and statues across the country that honor those who have benefited from slavery, including some past presidents. This movement is openly attacking the legacies of every person on Mount Rushmore, Trump said. He lamented cancel culture and charged that some of the political left hope to defame our heroes, erase our values, and indoctrinate our children. He said Americans should speak proudly of their heritage and shouldn't have to apologize for its history. We will not be terrorized, we will not be demeaned, we will not be intimidated by bad, evil people. Trump added, it will not happen. The speech and fireworks at Mount Rushmore came against the backdrop of a pandemic that killed over 125,000 Americans, The president flew across the nation to gather a big crowd of supporters, most of them maskless, and all of them flaunting public health guidelines that recommended not gathering in large groups. The discord was heightened as the Trump campaign confirmed during the president's speech that Kimberly Guilfoyle, sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation, or not sorry, you decide, a top fundraiser for the campaign and girlfriend of Trump's eldest son, Don Jr., has tested positive for the coronavirus while in South Dakota. Both Guthrie and Trump Jr., who served as top surrogates for the president, are isolating themselves and have canceled public events, according to Sergio Gore, chief of the staff to the Trump's campaign's finance committee. During the speech, the president announced he was signing an executive order to establish a national garden of American heroes, a vast outdoor park that will feature the statues of the greatest Americans to ever live. Amid the campaign headwinds, the president has sharpened his focus on his most ardent base of supporters as concern grows inside his campaign that his poll numbers in battleground states that will decide the 2020 election are slipping. Trump recent weeks have increasingly lashed out that the left-wing mob used a racial epithet to refer to the coronavirus and visited the nation's southern border to spotlight the progress of 2016 and promised to build that U.S. border wall. U.S.-Mexico border wall. Well, I'd go into more of that, but I am not. I'm just going to take a step backward of this for a second. Now, let's put a little background to this. Donnie Jr.'s girlfriend, tested positive for corona. The Trump staff, I'm sure, was doing the same things here as they were in Tulsa. In another friendly place, where the governor is friendly enough to Trump that isn't forcing any mask rules or any social distancing. I ask you, what is the possibilities of these people getting infected by coronavirus? Now, I ask this after we had our Tulsa rally in the past week or so. Now, I've been late on the ball in doing these videos, so I wasn't live on the scene, as it were, to do my own perspective on this whole thing. Set aside the TikTok and the K-pop and that debacle of how they actually got on wanting reserved tickets and reneged, obviously, as a way to troll Trump's campaign, and how it works like a charm. That they would actually go and tout how 1 million or so people were wanting to go and visit this event. Now, the event in Tulsa, the venue was only supposed to hold about 19,000 people. Shouldn't that have strapped up warning signs, little red lights? It's like, 1 million people want to go to this place. That can only hold 19,000. We're going to have to turn the populations of several small countries away. But they were so eager that this was true, that they were anticipating overflow, and that they were going to have a stage outside, and there would be like secondary meetings, or like Trump would show up or Pence would show up at these overflows after the main stage stuff. Well, that turned out wrong. And we've heard the numbers ad nauseum. It was only 6,200 people showed up in what they thought was going to be, at the very least, 40,000, which would mean overflow at the 19,000 that was in there. Yeah. Now, I had a lot of questions that night because I was active on social. I just wasn't doing a video on it. But I have, if you ever go to the Middle America and scroll down about a week or so, you'll see all my enjoyments of this whole thing. But one of the things that got me, that I found that was interesting, was this is Tulsa, Oklahoma. This should be the rubiest of red states, rubiest of red towns, pro-Trump town. Even if this whole TikTok, K-pop, that whole thing, even though that was a significant thing that affected people going here, I would have expected that local Oklahomans from Tulsa and surrounding area, the bulk of the state really, would have been showing up anyway, organically, to go to this event. Either go in to actually be able to sit in the event, or be outside with their signs showing their solidarity. But that didn't happen. You can draw your conclusions of why that didn't happen. That it could have been the TikTok thing. It could have been the protesters, because Trump was blaming the protesters, even though the local sheriffs in Tulsa said, yeah, there were protesters and there were counter-protesters, but none of them was blocking the way. Anyone could have gotten into the overflow. Anyone could have gotten into the building that the event was being held. No one was being held up because of protesters. So that was a lie. Could have been the fear of coronavirus. Because from that point, we're already starting to see, even after we have these grand reopenings, and no matter how they're trying to tout the reopenings and trying to count down and downplay that yeah, cases were coming up. Cases were exploding. Places were becoming hot spots for this. They had that they didn't want that to be an excuse. You know, everything is all clear now. We're rearing open. Corona's behind us now. That was the public line. I mentioned this. There were 10 official counts of people tested positive for COVID-19 on or about the event of the Tulsa rally, during the event of the Tulsa rally, after the event of Tulsa rally. You know where they were from? The Trump administration, the Trump campaign. Confirmed 8 members of the Trump staff, 2 members of the Secret Service. He was bringing coronavirus to Tulsa. Whether it was there or whether or not there to begin with is immaterial. It's proof positive that his campaign was bringing it with them. And now we know even more after the fact, because Herman Cain, who attended the Tulsa rally, tested positive for corona afterwards. Be it he caught it there or caught it elsewhere, nonetheless, went in, after the fact, positive. After the Tulsa rally, every member of the campaign staff that was running the rally had to go into quarantine. Hashtag Typhoid Trump isn't just a clever and snarky hashtag. Now you go to Mount Rushmore, Don Jr.'s girlfriend has it, and she was there. Her and him isolated. But in a nice, tight, packed group at the foot of Mount Rushmore, adulating before their precious. You want to take the odds of how many people's going to get sick afterwards? You know, you kind of go back, and when you think about it in the concept of what we're doing with the virus now, that we are seeing those hotspots flare up. You look on the map, and so many states are increasing their count since reopening. My state, Virginia, is holding steady. Is that positive or negative? I don't know, but our numbers are holding steady. It's not dropping, but it's not increasing. It's staying in the same relative per day amount of cases. But places that Trump was going to, Oklahoma, Arizona, that he did his little, his other rally, where he touted upon, he's going to build that wall, and here comes the caravan, because it's election time, and caravans always come in election time. That touting the after nearly 4 years of 3 miles worth of new wall, and calling the coronavirus a kung flu virus, which he also did in Tulsa, and how they're defending that, even though that's not racist. I had arguments on social upon people using these type of words and using these different names for the virus. First of all, he never mentioned any other name. He's just, there's 19 names, but kung flu. Here, what we got though is, I used to argue that even saying the Chinese virus, Chinese flu, Wuhan virus, I also thought that was kind of racist, simply because it's laying blame on a place where even their own individual people in that country is also getting sick and also dying from it. So you're victimizing the victims in that. But then, as it turns out, I was wrong on that, simply because, major viruses that came and go in our history has been named after the area for which it originates. West Nile, and so forth. Hanta. Usually the places where they originate, they get their name from. So Wuhan virus is fair play. It's not necessarily racist, right? But King Precious, we don't want to go there. We want to call it the Chinese flu, but we don't want to call it Chinese. Let's just call it kung flu. But that's not racist. That's telling you who's to blame for it, but that's not racist. We can call it the Wuhan virus. No, we don't want to. We want to insult him. Okay, whatever. Now, you have that, and the idea, this infantile idea that if you had less tests, then they would have less cases. It brings us up over and over again. Some people are trying to say that he was joking, and then he says he's not joking. Especially the point where he was saying that he wanted to tell the people, or he told the people, he claimed, to slow the testing down. I'm amazed that none of his sycophantic surrogates are saying the same thing. At least not the hardcore ones. The ones who have one shred of sanity left in their heads. They go, let's not say that. It is infantile, it is childish to claim that if you don't test, then there will be no cases. It disgusts me that I would have to explain this. Just because there are no tests and you don't have any official cases does not mean there are no official cases. They're just unofficial, undiagnosed. So you slow down or you stop people from testing. We have articles of them trying to defund those institutions that are doing national tests. That doesn't make the virus go away. That actually makes the virus even more aggressive. And why I say that is because when you don't have people tested and those people do not get treatment and they don't know if they have it or not, they are able to spread it to everybody else in their area. Their family members, friends, total strangers, because what? They don't know. Even if they're not asymptomatic, even if they have symptoms, they don't know because they can't be tested, or you don't want them to be tested. So reminds me of how the government treated, prior to 85, what was going on with the AIDS crisis, before it was even called AIDS, when it was called GRID, when the CDC was monitoring this, but the Reagan administration didn't want to put any money in it. So people who were undiagnosed and those who were diagnosed by something but with a shoestring budget, because CDC was begging for money for research on that. So people with GRID, people with AIDS, get sick, they study them, they die. There was no AZT, there was no treatments. Certainly nothing that we have today that we see advertised on the news channels, because there was no funding for that prior to 85. The major studies that are doing at the time was meager compared to what the capabilities they could have had they had federal support, which they finally got after 85. But that's a score of how many people that were sick and died. That reminds me of this, where they would say that this was a Reagan trip to throw gay people back into the closet. This is just another political trip to throw the sick that is inconvenient for the narrative. Throw them into the closet, throw them under the bed. And so you're going to get people sick, and they're going to die of long illnesses, undiagnosed long illnesses, which is, what they want. They don't want people to die, but they don't want people to be acknowledged that they died of corona. I mentioned that weeks ago. Sad to say, maybe months ago. But there are already states who are pro-Trump, who wanted to help support his narrative, wanted him to get the economy back and running, that we're going to hide how people died. We have articles of that of Florida. Something similar in Tennessee. Well, like, oh yeah, this one died. They died of complications. They died of a pneumonia. They divided by heart failure. But the overarching thing of how they got this illness, they won't mention that it was coronavirus related. He says, no more tests, no more cases. Then the virus disappear. He said in a Fox interview that one day they're just going to disappear. He hopes that. I mean, as a conspiracy theorist, I don't really do much in conspiracy theories. I do more like probabilities. So let's say conspiracy probabilities. How probable is it, starting with the states that are friendly to Trump, the governors who are friendly to Trump, they would tap down the actual numbers of those diagnosed, that they themselves will depress the numbers of cases to support the election, support this theory that corona is over. We already seen articles where a governor, I'm trying to think which state it was, I don't know if it's Texas now, because the Texas governor, even though he wants people to wear masks, he's not going to make it mandated, but he wants people to please wear masks. That's as hardcore as he's going to get. But I'm trying to remember which state it was. Was it Nebraska or Kansas? Now, silly me for not doing too much into that. But the governor of this particular state said that he will not give out funding to communities who promote masks. What the fuck is wrong with you? Is the sycophantic loyalty to Donald Trump more important than the people of your state? And this is going to be an interesting period of time between now and the future, because we're going to have a lot of people having discussions upon who they're going to let in their state. Kind of similar to what the European Union are doing, where they're not going to allow Americans in the European Union to come visit. And various other countries are now picking up on that, because unlike Donald Trump, who says that we're over the woods and it's passed behind us, he tells world leaders that he beat Corona, we have met 2 record days in this past week of cases. 50,000 and change the first day, 56,000 the next day. It's not going anywhere. And no amount of non-testing is going to make anyone safe. You want to give someone false security and bravado that they don't wear a mask? Stoke the fires of people who are silly enough to think that wearing a mask is violating their rights? How many of these videos do we see of like people losing their shit because a business wants them to wear a mask going in? My company, my grocery store, has signs up that says you need to wear a mask coming in, or we would like you to wear a mask going in. Now, originally when this came out, I was one of the people that was enforcing it. Now, I wasn't being mean about it, but I was like, yeah, because I'm wearing my mask and most people got it, and some people gave attitude about it, and then they softened the restriction, and they told me not to tell people not to come in without a mask anymore. It was just, okay, whatever. You keep the signs up, but you don't want us to enforce. That's like that's the soft, let's have both things here, right? When you think of the numbers, or where we are now, last count, 2,700,000 or so cases, over 125,000 dead. Think of it in perspective. What would it be? What would the numbers be if governors did not shelter in place? If we did not have social distancing requirements, mask requirements? How big would that number be? You look at other countries who had gotten horrific numbers of cases and deaths. Italy, for example. They come out on the other side of this with their shelter in place, their masks, and their curve dropped. Still there, but nowhere near where we're at now. Someone made an interesting observation of the world count and our count. That in the last few days, combined, the European Union, several countries in Asia, several countries in North Africa, England, all their cases combined in a single day was about 6,000 and change. And yesterday we did 56,000 cases. Now, were their leaders fucking around with our perspective as our leader was? There's a timeline that you can find of all of Trump's announcements and proclamations of how this virus was nothing, that it was only going to be 15 people, that it was going to be down to 0, and that it was going to go away in April, it was going to go away with wings, and magically poof, disappear. Tick, 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 goes up. because Candyland President doesn't live in our reality, and he's only looking at the perspective of his perception, what he wants people to perceive of him. He has to be a success. The economy has to roar at the expense of people sick and dying. You know, a month or 2 months ago, that statement that I just made might sound melodramatic. It's not anymore. We are living through this. And by the way, what you're going to hear from the Trump administration in the next few days is that their tone and their stance on the coronavirus is just, we'll live with it. We will live with it. This will become a norm that you'll have to deal with, but still keep supporting us. He just doesn't want to talk about the coronavirus anymore. Not at all. He wants to do his fake spin on the economy. He wants to talk about caravans. He wants to, go after people about Confederate statues. We'll get into that. But he doesn't want to talk about this. Because from all the bravado, all the contradictions he did to his own people, his own experts on this, he did not come out a winner like he always wants to look. He's not going to have the perception of him destroying the coronavirus or bringing us out of the nightmare of the coronavirus. He wasn't able to secure, remember that story in Germany where he was trying to get the materials from that one company? They deny it, but, whatever. If it's true, try and get the materials so he can develop a Trump vaccine so he could be the savior. That's a little V from Vendetta, a little bit. He's not even from his own people. He's not looking like the hero in this, the savior. So he wants to abandon it. He doesn't want to talk about it. Let's talk about the racial unrest where he's on the wrong side of that goddamn history. Let's talk about, yet again, Confederate statues. I ended the last video on that, and I needed to go, I remembered I needed to go into more detail on that. I got into pretty detail about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and their hypocritical stance on slavery, where they didn't like slavery, but they were slaveholders. And when the statue of John C. Calhoun was coming down, I wanted to, and I neglected to do it, I wanted to show him as a contrast. Because if George Washington and Thomas Jefferson really hated slavery, but they felt, for whatever reason, as 18th century people, smart, intelligent people, but nonetheless, 18th century people living with the concept of slavery, at least in this country, or in their colonies as they grew up as, was part of their way of life. That they cannot conceive of what would happen to their slaves if they were freed, because they didn't have a notion that they would be accepted as equal people, men and women. That was a concept that was hard for Abraham Lincoln. And as a 19th century man, no matter how you want to spin it, he was also as racist as any other person in the 19th century, outside of the hardest core abolitionists. Because when you break down abolitionists, there were some who were absolutely hardcore, who said that slaves should be free, they should be given equality, not even given, equal. You're a human being, equal. There's nothing should be given. It should be a fact of life. And then there are those who are abolitionists who hated slavery, but that's as far as they go. I think Lincoln was kind of like that at the start. Because he hated the concept of slavery, he hated how it looked to us as, slave owners. They're bad people, read slave owners. But then once these slaves are freed, Lincoln didn't want to deal with them. Lincoln helped found the country of Liberia, as a jumping off point in order to colonize freed blacks back to Africa. I mentioned this before, and Wendell Phillips's sarcasm on that, upon Lincoln being a first-rate, second-rate man. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe in the midpoint of the Civil War, when black troops started fighting for the Union, and they were dying for their freedom. They don't care about the Union. I mean, what was the Union to them? The Union wasn't helping them prior to the Civil War. But they understand pragmatically. Yeah, I'll put on the blue coat. I'll pick up the rifle. I'll stand in the line. I will fire. I will get killed. The price of the freedom of me and my family. Abraham Lincoln, had he lived, was going to start the framework of civil rights. I believe he had that epiphany. But we'll never know. Obviously. We never will know. And of course, Andrew Johnson pretty much tried to screw all that over because of his under-the-tables loyalty and sympathy to the fucking Confederates. So history lesson aside, John C. Calhoun, who had his statue came down, who was a vice president to John Quincy Adams and to Andrew Jackson, who, unlike Jefferson and unlike Washington, was not a regretful slave owner. He wasn't one of those who saw just slavery as the necessity of the economics of the southern states, as a lot of people took. That was their justification for having slaves. Well, we need them. You know, we need them. We need as many as we can in order to pump out this cotton through our cotton gin. Thanks, Eli. That was their backbone of their economy, not only their peculiar institution and cherished way of life. John C. Calhoun loved slavery. He thought it was the pinnacle of the dominance of the white race. His counter-argument against emancipation in the 1830s was that, you know, if they were emancipated, these slaves, they might even raise to the level of equality. And if that happens, then we'll see the situation reversed, where the slaves and their northern sympathizers become the masters and we the slaves. That's what he thought in the 1830s. 30 years before there was even a civil war, before there was an Emancipation Proclamation, before there was a constitutional amendment. If any of these statues deserved going down, his fucking deserved going down. The guy was a gleeful monster of white supremacy. I actually had a conversation at my work with an old lady who was decrying what was going on, and she was sad about the statues going down. I said, really? Statues going down? And she asked, what, you don't think so? Yeah, I like them going down. And she was shocked at this. Just because I'm in Virginia, like I'm supposed to be, you know, lockstep with my state's history. I hate to break it to you, even back in the Civil War, George Thomas, Union General from Virginia. Montgomery Megg, Union General, Virginia. Montgomery Megg blamed Robert E. Lee for the death of his son, so much so that he took over Lee's home in Arlington. Montgomery Megg created Arlington Cemetery, the first hallowed ground of the United States. Montgomery Megg buried his son in Robert E. Lee's Rose Garden as the ultimate fuck you to the man that he decided was the cause of his son's death. There was a on the Ken Burns Civil War. They talked about what Robert E. Lee did after the war, and he did a lot of things. He swore a loyalty oath back to the United States. He tried to convince Confederate generals also to follow suit. There was one notion, because he became like he headed up a college, and he taught everything but mathematics, and he decried having only a military education. There was one little blip of history where it was talking about how he was going back and forth towards Washington on the train, and he would not look out the window because Arlington Cemetery was alongside, and that was where his former home was. When it comes to our history, whether it's tearing down statues, burning history books, omitting this, exaggerating that, I don't think history gets torn down because of removal of statues. Especially when it comes to Confederate statues, because, again, I mentioned this before, majority of those statues that are especially on public grounds or in government buildings, they were erected in the 20th century. They were erected in the time where segregation was at its height. Jim Crow was prevalent. That pro-Southern leanings were no longer a detriment. Because around the same time, Dixie flags started showing up too, especially in Southern politics. The statues were the representation of white supremacy, of segregation, and it was a fuck you to the black community that had to suffer under that inequality. Before then, there were no Southern statues, no Confederate statues. And those few that actually were bought for private property or to commemorate battle sites. They weren't on federal buildings. They weren't in Washington. They weren't in the state capitals of these states. Until that came up, and then it became socially acceptable, and then somehow that became the new heritage. Because no one wants to acknowledge, when they talk about like the Confederate flag or the statues, they just want to say it's their heritage, but they don't ever go farther than that. They don't ever go, what these symbols represent. They only say what it represents to them. They talked about the Dixie flag and what it represents them, freedoms and rebellion and so forth and such. For the actual creator of the rebel flags, they denote them as the symbols of white supremacy. That's what they were. I mean, this is almost the reverse of taking the Buddha symbol and it becoming reversed and becoming a swastika. And people now go, oh, the Buddha symbol. No, that's not anymore. Unless you're a Buddhist. And Donald Trump is very eager, in order, I'm assuming, to keep his grip on his voting base, so eager to assail and maintain these statues, having these statues guarded, making it a federal crime for anyone to try to deface it or remove them, for 10 years in prison. 10 years in prison to protect statues of people that fought for the Confederacy, fought for slavery. He supports that. He will threatens to veto a defense spending bill that would help the military, because one of the portions of this bill is the renaming of military bases and sites that have Confederate general names. He will veto that. But your heritage is going away. It's wiping away your history. It's stupid. The stupid allies say that shit, in the government. You're taking away the history of our white people. Then read books. Read history books. As I said earlier, and they were having this discussion upon history, I wonder if people just want simple history or nuanced history. People worry about, taking down these statues as taking down our history. They're just statues. Are you learning from a statue? Someone said something to the effect of, well, maybe we should keep the statues up as examples of the events and actions of people and not to do it again. That's the complete reversal of the whole point they were up there. They were up there to honor white supremacy. Don't keep them up just because, let's not act like that again. Now, for the debate of should this go farther, and I kind of brought this up in the last one, should go farther than just Confederate statues, but for all slaveholding figures in our history, including our past presidents like Washington and Jefferson, etc. And I was on the fence on this because the one caveat with Confederate generals, Confederate soldiers, these statues, they were fighting against the United States. They were killing American United States soldiers for the Confederacy, for their stars and bars. Majority of these people who were fighting on the southern side of the Civil War had no slaves. They were poor. Some were fighting just because it was an adventure. It was a summer lark. They're not, they fought because they're convinced that their rights were being violated. What rights of theirs was being violated? These people who did not own slaves. They were told by those who did own slaves that their rights were being violated. Part of the propaganda to gear up for creating a Confederate army. In 1862, there was a draft for the Confederate soldiers, and the way that you could be exempt from the draft, one of the ways, was if you owned 20 slaves. A Confederate soldier, you can find this in the Ken Burns series, quoted about it, talked about the draft. He talked about, you can get out of the draft if you own 20 Negroes, and that gave us the blues. We wanted 20 Negroes. We kept hearing the words, rich man's war, poor man's fight. Oh, I'm sorry, Sam. That's his name, Sam. That sucks for you that you were so poor that you couldn't own 20 slaves so you can get out of the war. You were fighting it anyway. There's a lot to go into throughout all this, from these rallies, from the coronavirus, to statues. We are getting into the silliness of the election. Trump doesn't like his numbers. We get into this Russia bounty thing. And I've been hesitant of really getting into this because my thing is that I need confirmation of this actually happening. Before we even get to the Trump response or lack thereof of it, I want to know if this actually happened. Because when I see videos on here that say it's bogus, um, I say like my friend Vin from Vin's Story from Middle America is doing. I'm not necessarily saying that he's wrong in this because we don't have all the information on it. But he's also responding to somebody who thinks it's absolutely true immediately. Like as soon as he heard it, the guy rushed up to the camera and started doing a video and talking about how Trump is a traitor. Not all the information is out. There's a lot of news organizations are saying that a lot of this stuff is confirmed, and they have different sources of confirmation. European intelligence is saying they're confirming it. An Afghan contractor was talking about how the Russian agents were offering $100,000 a head, or their standard of $100,000 of American and British troops. British intelligence, various news sources, captured Taliban fighters, criminals. But of course, none of that. You can't say that that's 100% certainty, right? And then you have the flip side of this, where you have people who wonder about Trump, as it's going to be another Russian hoax, another thing, whatever. Set that aside. Or people who are going, well, doesn't this stuff happen like every day that we just don't know about it? Shouldn't we be more worried about the leaks than should we be worried about the response or lack thereof of our president when we hear that Russian agents or members of their intelligence is offering money in exchange for American scalps? I don't know about that, because the person who brought that up, Isabel, is not wrong in that, because we don't know how many horrible things that could have been happening at all times throughout many presidencies that we'll never know. So maybe there shouldn't be a response. But the problem with that is that the ambiguity of this particular issue, where people were hearing about this back in 2019 when it was happening, this was part of the written briefing, but he never read it. And the press secretary says, we get 10,000 or so briefings from the National Security Council, and then we just didn't get it. So, something like bounties are being put on American soldiers, that goes in the spam folder, I guess. That's not important enough. You hear about people who are briefers, talking about how every time they try to mention anything negative about Russia, Trump would flip out over. He didn't want to hear it. He did not want to hear it. So the excuse of him not knowing it is that either they tried and he refused to hear it, or they knew he didn't want to hear it, so they did nothing. These are professional career people here. And that is such a dereliction. Not counting Trump's dereliction. Maybe we'll get to that. But if the second part of that is true, then that is ridiculous. He acts like a petulant child. But this is serious shit. People, if this is true, you have to preface it that if this is true. But if this is true, soldiers could have been dying. Not just because they're in Afghanistan, not just because they're on patrol, not just because there was a roadside bomb or someone was taking pot shot. Someone was out there actively gunning for them beyond the concept of war, but for we don't know all the facts. And I will not go as far as these people were flying off the handles and saying that whatever Trump did or didn't do kind of tantamounts to treason. Because in the definition of treason, you have to be actively working against your country. Now we do a lot of like, hyperbolic stuff in claiming that all the actions that he does goes against the country. In the abstract maybe, but that's not. You can theorize that's not the intent, because the things that he does is for him. It's not for another foreign power. It's for him. What happens for him? The perception towards him. What benefits that he would get? What drawbacks there could be that could be detrimental to him? So I don't know if there was an inaction to this, because for someone that the press secretary says is the most informed person on the planet, we just informed him now. So he wasn't informed all that time? The most informed man on the planet? We have to say something that is completely unwoke and quite sexist, probably, that you could say, but she is Press Secretary Barbie. I mean, what else can you say? I mean, she goes home to her Malibu dream house? No. But his inaction, if it's true, is also nothing new. When it comes to people he considers his allies, or his business partners, or people that he's doing a quid pro quo transaction with, and not the one like from Ukraine. For example, the death of Jamal Khashoggi. He wasn't all gung-ho upon going after the Crown Prince on that. Well, everybody else, including our intelligence, including the rest of the world, says that's the guy that did it. He didn't want to get involved in that. He didn't want to out him. He flailed and tried to say it could have been anybody else. He didn't want his business partner being implicated, because I would, implicate him, because they have an arms deal for them to buy our military-grade equipment so they continue their war in Yemen, killing people with our shit that he's making money off of. I don't know how much the United States is making money off of that arms deal. I wonder how much money he's making it off theirs. When it's his business partners, when it's his allies, he is mum. Would it surprise you to know that he has no opinion on Russian agents putting bounties on American soldiers? That he has nothing to say about that? Whatever you believe of Russian interference or not in 2016 is immaterial at this point. Because we've seen from the election on up his affect, his affection, his eagerness to be next to Vladimir Putin. When sanctions were being imposed on Russia, to the point where there was a veto-proof majority of Republicans and Democrats, and he had to sign it to oppose it, he complained on doing it. Diamond, the point being is that, be it his buddies, his little fan club of despotic dictators that he wants to be so much friends with, or people he's doing arms deals with, or people who he just wants to look like he's such good friends with, so when they're doing bad shit he can just like wave it away. It doesn't really matter. And it goes even with this bounty issue, because those who support him are going to believe whatever he says, They're going to treat us who have our doubts as we're the ones with the problem and it's all fake news and this and that. And in the end, even if reality is staring them in the face, they will choose the perceptional reality that the dancing bear is giving them, as opposed to actual reality. In actual reality, where they stand so close to each other without masks, may get them sick, and they may die. Or they will brush off the deaths of our soldiers in Afghanistan and not question whether or not they died heroically, or if their deaths came at a price on their heads that our government and our head of our government chose to ignore. Alright guys, I'm out for now. The Ranter rants because the urge to rant is always rising, and there will be more to come. Good night.